is potentially the show. I took up the name Kali Varghese after retracing my ancestry and wanting to reclaim something for myself. The name that I used to perform under was Charlie George, a name given to me by my single-parent white mum, because unfortunately the colonizer always stays. And growing up with a white mother means I've got all the awkwardness of being white and none of the privilege. I was the only person of colour arrested at a Black Lives Matter protest for being out of rhythm. I can fall over flat surfaces, but not into a well-paying job. We didn't have any money growing up, but we did have fun. We grew up just before the internet. We still remember having to get dopamine the hard way, by using our imaginations. Yeah, in my childhood, you couldn't just look up a funny cat video. We had to go out into the street and find a real cat and just sort of hope they did something hilarious. I did enjoy being raised by a street of working class mothers in Swindon in the UK. Growing up, we were all in each other's houses and had something called community and childminders. Unqualified drunk women who would sort of keep an eye on you. I owe everything in my life to the labour and love of women. I do think single mothers could run this country because they'd get it done, you know? They'd feed us all, clothe us all, house us all, and still have enough money left to bribe the moon.
Yep.
We also were raised, I was also raised as a devout Jehovah's Witness. Being a Jehovah's Witness kid is a uniquely embarrassing experience. I tried to fit in with games on the playground, but Simon says, repent for the end is near, doesn't go down well. What did your parents want for you growing up? You know, like probably a good job, a nice relationship. Well, my mum wanted all that, but also for me and my sister to go door to door in the Wiltshire countryside, selling God to racists, armed with nothing but pamphlets and a smile. Also, like a lot of working class women at the time, we were Avon ladies. Do you remember Avon ladies? Yeah. Ding dong, Avon calling. Do you have any idea what it is like taking to the streets to badly sell Jesus or a perm? Going back to the doors you knocked on at the weekend, but this time with beauty products. People being like, oh God, not you again. If you're not interested in this cream, have you considered joining the anointed ones in heaven? We'd make it a game, of course. You know, we'd flip a coin to see who'd get the scary houses covered in St. George's flags. I'd often lose. You know, I'm darker, but my sister can't run as fast. And I remember once turning to my sister on the doorstep and saying, you know, what if the world isn't ending? You know, like what if this is it, right here, right now, and all we have is each other? You know, and what if our desires aren't actually bad or dangerous, but they lead us to knowledge about ourselves and the world, and instead of burning it down, you know, we could just take care of it instead and choose each other and joy. And she said, this guy's got a massive swastika tattoo on his face, heads or tails. I'd say the key lessons I learned from a Jehovah's Witness upbringing are, God hates you, and you must work and be of endless service to earn his approval. Judge everyone, including yourself. Everything is a test to see if you're worthy. Spoiler alert, you're not. Constantly await death and disaster, and if it's not there, create it so you feel more safe and secure. The Jehovah's Witness congregation, they're sort of like a hierarchy run by a group of elders. Now it's hard to describe them because I'm not sure where else in society we find an example of this, but they're sort of like conservative men in suits making all the decisions on women's bodies. I know, it's really hard to picture it. Other key highlights in the form of a memorable childhood song are as follows. Please do join in if you know the words. No birthdays, no Christmas, no sex before marriage, no blood transfusions, no joy. It's not all trauma though. I think I got most of my main life skills that mean I can do public speaking as a job from going door to door as a Jehovah's Witness. You need to be able to work with a script but also improvise with the unpredictable and volatile nature of the general public. I spent many years under the name Charlie George doing stand-up, going up and down the country, performing to 97% white audiences, where I'd often get the same response as Meghan Markle. Fucked by a ginger on my way out. I left the Jehovah's Witnesses and my family home in my early teens, and I would spend the rest of my developmental years profoundly alone in the world and thrust into this soul-searching journey exploring connection, belonging, home, and faith. People would always ask me about the other side of my heritage. Someone described me as if Alanis Morissette took her gap year in Sri Lanka, and as an angry brown woman with IBS, I found that flattering, but did a DNA test just to be sure. So I headed to India from the UK. It was going to be my classic eat, pray, love trip. Only I'm anglicised and I've got IBS, so it was more sort of eat, cry, shit. I spent my childhood in the Wiltshire countryside in fear of the St George's flag. I travelled 7,658 kilometres to a remote village called Amboori in India, only to find it's been colonised and they're having a St George's Day festival in the streets on the day I arrive. That flag and that cross is everywhere, and so is white winky Elvis Jesus, because get this, they're no longer Hindus or Buddhists, they're conservative Catholic Christians. What? No! Jesus Christ, I can't get away from him. Now, I should specify I'm not personally against people conceptualizing a God to help them navigate the great mystery of life, but, why not conceptualize a God that loves you for all that you are and your inherent worth and value? Just an idea. Like, if there is a God, it's hard for me to imagine. It didn't want you to be exactly as you are. What's your name? Rob. Divine, clearly. No notes. Anyway, I'm in India. It's unexpectedly St George's Day. I'm overwhelmed and I take this walk to clear my head, right? And I'm listening to some music by these stunning mountains and I start dancing with sheer joy and I'm feeling really free and liberated, and for a moment I imagine who I'd be without the eyes of Christian domination on me. Perhaps in a world where we worshipped women, and where my mouth and tongue knew the shape of our language, Malayalam, is wild and free and untamed, and my tongue comes out of my mouth. And I'm like this feral female creature full of life. When this Catholic priest comes running over, and he's frantically waving his arms and shouting, and I take my headphones out and he tells me I must stop because I'm dancing on a burial ground full of ancestors. And now I'm crouched near a tombstone with my tongue out, somewhat mortified, and I'm trained to be polite in English, and I think, well, obviously this is wrong, everything about me is wrong. And I start feeling guilty for my own existence and shrinking back, and I get convinced into going with him for tea, and he attempts to convert me to Catholicism in this tiny white church. And inside I'm sat there like, mate, you cannot convert a converter. I've heard it all before. Like, if God doesn't want me as I am, full of lust, dark thoughts, homosexual tendencies, and murderous hormonal rage, I'm not buying what's being sold. But I don't want to bring shame on my extended family members that I've only just met, so I let him do his thing, okay? And he's persistent. He thinks I'm redeemable. He drives me to communion in his suspiciously flashy Jeep, because the church always seems to have quite a lot of money, doesn't it? And whilst driving, he turns to me and says, and I quote, "Do I know Justin Bieber?" And I'm like, what? Yeah, but not personally. And he's like, I want to be just like him. And I'm thinking, weird choice, but I smile and nod, and the whole experience is so surreal as I'm careering through the stunning mountain landscape of my ancestors with this fame-hungry young Catholic priest who is singing along loudly to Justin Bieber in his Jeep. He's got Elvis sunglasses on, a flashy new iPhone, and a giant Jeep. Yeah, thanks to Catholicism, this village boy is the Justin Bieber of Amboori. And I never forgot it. Not in the silence of an ashram, training in meditation, yoga, and ancient spiritual practices. Not when I sat under the stars with my Amahi watching an old Bollywood dance movie. Not when we were eating fresh sambar in Italy for breakfast. Not when my body plunged into the Ganges River and came out singing. Not when I imagined what it would be like to be queer here. And how would you keep it under wraps? Tuck it into the folds of your sari with all the other unaccepted parts of you. bound into the shape he walked in, wildness contained. I would return to the UK post-Brexit and the pressures of an increasingly divisive, individualistic and suffocating capitalist culture, accelerating its pace into online living. With rents rising and the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and the values of domination and greed suffocating the human spirit. With Western psychotherapy blaming and pathologizing individuals for collective and systemic problems, a yoga studio I was working at held a panel discussion on cultural appropriation in the West and how yoga had become an expensive commodity stripped of its intended spiritual purpose. Spirituality deemed too woo-woo and laughable to a rational scientific West that laid claim to all knowing, even if that knowing was founded in racism, supremacy, and lies. Simmering beneath the surface of my rage and shame, something of that moment, something of that forgotten free spirit of Kali, dancing with her ancestors at the foot of a mountain, stayed with me, held me together throughout the ongoing challenges of my life, gave me conviction and power where I was told I was powerless. With my ancestors at my back, I could walk through fire. Because the truth is, I was taught to hate my culture and hate myself. Hate the parts of me deemed uncivilized to the West. In order to fit in England like my ancestors before me, I'd have to contort myself and hide, become westernized, climb my way back up to worthy through some bullshit Thatcherite version of success, buy back my way to validity through privatized knowledge systems and expensive education, whilst other indigenous ways of being and knowing were devalued. And then, when isolated and enslaved by work, I could buy my way back to the community that was eroded and stolen in the first place. I'd be given labels and categories and diversity schemes and unpaid opportunities to claw my way back to a dominant center that created the exclusion and exile in the first place. But I'm not allowed to mention it, and I'm not allowed to be angry. Marginalized people are rarely afforded the right to tell their own story, and when they are, they're expected to tell it in ways that maintain the status quo and reinforce dominant cultural narratives. I'm not going to do that. Not anymore. Never again. May the remnants of empire within us crumble to dust. May we come back to our hearts to heal and know love and our true worthiness. I think the girl all those years ago stood on the doorstep was right. We're so seduced by the idea of perpetual apocalypse and destruction in the world that we can't imagine a way out of a dominator, slave, and master model of society where someone somewhere has to be exploited and extracted from in order for us to win. But what if the world isn't ending? You know, what if this is it, right here, right now, and all we have is each other? And what if our desires aren't actually bad or dangerous, but they lead us to knowledge about ourselves and the world? And instead of burning it down, we could just take care of it and choose each other and joy instead. And if I have any message from my ancestors in the mountains of Amboori and for Mother Earth, it would simply be